Welcome everybody. This is the second edition of Blockchain for Europe's webinar series. Today we will talk about the new digital economy and how blockchain and AI are converging and what this means for Europe, for the future of Europe's infrastructure, and what opportunities and risks are at stake. And that's why we invited Peteris Zilgalvis, who a lot of you already know. He's the head of unit of DG Connect at the European Commission. He's responsible for digital innovation and blockchain. He's also in charge of the EBSI, the European Blockchain Infrastructure Project. And on the other side, we have Humayun Sheikh from Fetch.AI. He's the CEO and founder. He has a proven track record in the space and one of the front runners when it comes to convergence of AI and blockchain. And that's why we wanted to bring them together today to discuss this important issue. And maybe to kick this off, we will launch our first poll series, which we'll have today as well. So we have 5 questions, which we all ask you to take a look at and answer, please. And at the end, or rather before we start the Q&A session, I would like to present the results to our panelists so they can comment on it and also to give you an idea of where we stand and also give you a bit of inspiration of, for the Q&A session. So maybe to kick off the question of how convergence of blockchain and AI could help the European citizens, I will turn to Peteris now, who is overlooking this on the European Commission side, and maybe to give us a brief overview of what the European blockchain infrastructure is, how AI plays a role in there, what sectors you're looking in, and what's the timeline you're focusing on for the implementation of this. So please, Peteris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Robert. Well, the European Blockchain Partnership, which is all 27 EU member states and Norway and Liechtenstein, said in their declaration that they're going to build a European blockchain services infrastructure, and also stated that they would be open to public and private partnerships in the context of that. Right now, we're on the public side, 4 use cases on RegTech, regulatory reporting, self-sovereign identity, authentication and certification of audit documents and diplomas is well underway. We're moving from the test stage into the deployment stage from the coming months into 2021. The idea is really on the public sector side, where blockchain is justified as an excellent tool for multi-level governance. And this is where we look at decentralization as a spectrum from some perhaps not really existing centralized completely or decentralized completely approach. We would be able to contribute to a member state node system, cities, regions, this type of decentralized but not completely decentralized approach as a part of an ecosystem that includes the completely decentralized blockchains working in the convergence space with IoT and AI, for instance. And now I see a question on the screen. Should I introduce this, Robert, or are you going to do that?
You're on mute.
Geez, sorry, technical difficulty.
Robert, do you introduce the question or do I introduce?
No, we will let them run in the background so everybody can take some time. Sorry for that.
Okay, so that's where
no
we
worries
are.
about
Going
this.
into the Digital Europe Partnership, Digital Europe program, which will be in the next budget, we look to substantially scale up the European blockchain services infrastructure, and then there will also be the opportunities after an innovation procurement, a rather large one, to actually reach out to private partners and open up side chains or interoperability with private initiatives. Again, we see this very much as an ecosystem of decentralized digital technologies. And that's perhaps an introduction from my side.
Thank you, Peteris. I think that was quite clear. So I would like to turn to you, Humayun, as you're working in this space already for quite a while, and you've experienced a lot of opportunities and hurdles in the process of setting up Fetch, for example, but also from your earlier experience, could you maybe outline as an entrepreneur and who's founding a company like Fetch, how you would like the commission to, you know, help companies in the space that want to achieve this convergence, to maybe give the audience also an idea of where are where are the opportunities for the citizens at European level, and where are still the hurdles in place? Although, as you've just heard, the Commission is quite active in the space already, and that's great, and we totally support that, and we will support it even further in the future. But there's still member states underlying the European Union. Do you see any differences in there? Do you see any issues? You located in the UK, for example. Is this a specific place that is different than other places in Europe? And how this all come together when you want to achieve, so to say, the future infrastructure for Europe when you combine blockchain and AI?
Yeah, thank you, Robert, and it's a pleasure to be here, and it's always a pleasure to speak to you, Peteris. Yeah, so my opinion here, and I think what is quite interesting is that first of all, we need to look at what is it that we're trying to do. So this is a complete shift, and there is a lot of changes required, and things are changing, and the new technology which is coming in is actually a lot different from what the previous technologies have been. So it's never going to be an easy task to overcome. Now, the question where you say, what can the regulatory bodies and what can the governments do? The best thing they could do is actually to educate people. That's the first thing. And we shouldn't be scared of this new technology. And I think I see that a lot of the time. A lot of the people feel nervous about adopting new technology. What needs to be made clear is that is something which is going to happen, and we should educate people to make sure that they are actually going in the right way to adopting this new technology. So that is quite a key problem we face in terms of educating the people. The second very important thing is the clarity from the regulator. Now, I understand completely the problems the regulator will have, because the technology is developing at such a pace that it's not always easy to keep up with it, and even technologists can't keep up with it. To impose a regulation which is able to keep up with such a fast pace is always going to be difficult. But what is quite interesting is that certain regulatory bodies are taking that approach, that you have the ability to actually implement and try new things. And I think that's quite an important thing. And I think the EC is taking such an approach. The UK is also taking such an approach, whereby you have these sandboxes. I do have a slight criticism about sandboxes, which is that sometimes these sandboxes can end up in a bit of a hindrance. But generally, I think the whole thought process where you can educate and where you can enable the companies to innovate quickly and adapt quickly is the key thing which the governments and the regulatory bodies can do.
A question that follows up about what you just said is, you know, because we tend to look at some of these issues, and I'm not mentioning blockchain here in particular, but sometimes it's also the case where we address those issues in silos, you know, where you say like, look, we have to look at this technology, and then we have to look at this technology, and then we look at another technology. But as the discussion that we're today having is about convergence, and these technologies converge all the time, wouldn't it make sense to have like joint approaches from a regulatory perspective when it comes to those technology approaches or technologies that are developing? Is this something that the European Commission is considering? How would you approach this? How this could look like? Could you maybe give us some thoughts about that? That would be interesting.
Definitely. I mean, in general, we take an approach to regulation that, first of all, if it was ever true that if it moves, the European Commission regulates it, this isn't true now. I mean, myself and some colleagues, I mean, we've been following blockchain closely since about 2012, not the very beginning, but sometime up until now. And now we're only moving into the possibility of regulating some applications of it, which probably are on blockchain, but not confined to blockchain. One is the digital assets. The public consultation has closed now, and we are looking to follow up on the results of that with a legislative proposal, possibly in the autumn. The decisions are taken at a political level, the final decisions. And right now, and this I signal to all of you, in the Digital Services Act public consultation, we have a section of questions on smart contracts and how well they're able to work across borders in the digital single market, and if there's a risk of fragmentation, if there's questions about jurisdiction liability. We won't have a regulation on blockchain as such. It will be, as I said, just on some of the applications. And also, I mean, we don't have regulations on transistors, on servers. In a way, artificial intelligence, possibly because of the tremendous potential it has, and that you can say that no technology is either good or bad as such, it's the use it's put to, but because artificial intelligence is such a game changer, there is the artificial intelligence white paper, and then this might be an exceptional technology that is regulated as such. To my mind, and now just speaking a little bit in my personal opinion, it's something that I write about sometimes academically and have studied for some time, the law and political economy of decentralized digital ecosystems. It wouldn't make sense to regulate all the technologies because there might be regulation on AI, but what you want to do is both make possible with pro-innovation frameworks, things you want to stimulate competition, the crowdfunding regulation we had. We're positive about tokenization. We're positive about the use of smart contracts. We're positive about AI. We're investing in it a lot, but we don't want it to, lead to completely negative outcomes, to automated discrimination, things like that, which should be prevented. So it's a little bit of an approach like this, investing together. We have the AI and Blockchain Investment Fund, which my unit runs with the colleagues in artificial intelligence. Promotion together, but keeping to a minimum what we regulate. The idea is not to regulate anything that moves.
Thanks, Peteris, for the clarification. Do you want to comment on that, Humayun?
Yeah, I think startup companies and the founders of startup companies probably don't have that kind of a view. We look at it in a different way, which is exactly how it should be. We look at it in okay, how is this technology going to change for us, and what new can we bring to the space? And I think what that, I mean, you said there something, Peteris, which is that, you know, how can we enable this innovation framework where people can actually innovate? Now, if that exists and there is an easy way to access or register or declare that we're going to be trialing these new things, then the speed of innovation is much better, and the speed of deployment of innovation becomes much better. So the view I have is that, and that's where we feel there's either not enough clarity or there's not enough which is happening, is how do you enable these companies to push out these solutions in the market, which are covered and they can be comfortable, they can be safe in the sense of knowing that they're not kind of falling foul of any regulatory problems. And I think that's quite a key for innovators, the founders of a new startup, and I think that's something which I feel is still behind. But because most of the focus till now, and I think it's changing, and I think, Peteris, you're kind of playing an important part in it, is been on financial services. It's always been about currencies. It's always been about payment methods. You know, that's really a method of settlement or the method of value exchange. But there's a whole underneath. There is a whole other thing. So that's right at the end of value exchange, right? But you know, how is the delivery of services coming? Where is AI? AI is not always just about financial services. AI is about other things. It's about mobility. It's about transportation. It's about, you know, it's about doing all the things we do normally. It's about ordering food from some company. It's about we have seen more during this COVID-19 period. So it's about a lot more than just the payment mechanism. So in terms of blockchain, we've had a lot of attention on the financial services, the securities and digital assets. What we are yet to see is how we are actually taking the rest of it, because AI to me is should not be centralized. It should be synonymous to a decentralized space. And when we talk about decentralization, we talk about blockchain. Every time we talk about blockchain, the regulation comes in, talk about more financial sector. But what we need to kind of understand is, if we are going to take AI and we're going to actually decentralize it, it should not be a complex mechanism whereby everybody in the world is going to have some form of AI running for them. How do you take that approach and then you blend it with blockchain? That's really the key here, which I think we are just about starting to see. So, you know, when you used to have computers which were in one big room, now we have pocket computers, all the iPhones and, you know, all the phones which have huge processing power. We're now taking a leap into the next stage, which is we will have AI running for us continually, and we should be in control of our own AI. So we're looking at it from that point of view, that blockchain plays a very important part in it, because you don't need always a centralized entity to control it. So the regulator needs to put some form of regulation which enables individuals to be able to deploy solutions, individuals, not even tech companies, to then connect to this whole blockchain ecosystem and still be comfortable in how the governments can regulate. Because what is happening, which is quite a dangerous thing, is in certain cases companies are becoming bigger than countries. You have a complete shift of where we started from governments controlling the people and, you know, or kind of having an impact on how the legal applications are. We're now changing a shift where big companies are kind of starting to play that role. They seem to have a lot of money. They seem to have a lot of control. I think for me, that's a concern, because there are plenty of science fiction books where 2 or 3 companies are controlling the whole world without the world knowing about it. Now, this is the time to put that regulation and enable individuals to be in control of their own AI. Otherwise, we'll be too late. So that's my approach.
Thank you for that, Humayun. Peteris, please shoot.
I mean, that's really exciting to hear. I mean, one of my other titles is co-chair of the FinTech Task Force, but I'm on the digital single market side. So we're all the sectors where the application of the emerging technologies, or whatever you call them, the decentralized digital technologies, to the financial sphere and other sectors. We work closely with the colleagues in DG FISMA, who are obviously, if you have tokens, if you have blockchain that's used, and it has investor protection, MiFID, e-money, payments issues, obviously putting something on a blockchain shouldn't be a way to get away from investor protection. But on the other hand, I mean, other parts of my background are in environmental law, biotechnology, life sciences, along with financial services. And I and my team see this potential, exactly what you see for decentralized artificial intelligence, really getting the value of diverse data sets, of diverse centers of AI spread throughout Europe and spread throughout the world, and blockchain being a way to ensure the self-determination of individuals involved with that, with their data or with their AI, as you say. I mean, I think you're jumping to another stage, which I find exciting to hear. And also smaller enterprises, so that everything is not going through, let's say, a gatekeeper. So this is where I think one of the areas where blockchain becomes very exciting, the data coming out of Internet of Things being processed, or being the value being added by artificial intelligence, the conclusions, the value of the research of the analysis coming back and going to the correct recipient. So I think this is something we want to enable. And then speaking about, for instance, the tokens, the digital asset legislation. I mean, there'll be some rather large part of this which will be non-financial instruments. This is what some people call the utility tokens, consumer tokens. I mean, tokens used to run either applications or run decentralized systems themselves, which can be for societal good, which can be for donation of data, for instance, for health research, which can be, exactly as you're saying, for running AI, controlling AI, feeding AI with data that you wish to give to it. I mean, I think the list of examples is far beyond what I could imagine at this moment. And we want to make that possible with the legal frameworks. We want to make that possible with the investments, also in the Digital Europe program. We're looking for ways that we can perhaps support experimentation with decentralized management of data, which could be in the European blockchain services infrastructure context. And then I'll ask a question of you when I finish, what you didn't like about the regulatory sandboxes, because we see the blockchain services infrastructure of kind of a sandbox that we're utilizing with the member states, basically implementing the proportionality principle that you don't need to change or have specific laws on everything, but that you can interpret proportionately what you need to intervene on and what you can leave to the market, leave to individual citizens, or experiment with, as long as it doesn't damage the interests of the consumer, or if you jump back to the financial area, the interests of the investor.
Do you want to directly respond to Humayun? To the sandbox?
Yeah, I'm just gonna on the sandbox. And again, I don't want to be too specific about which jurisdiction, but I just to give you an example, and it's more of a general example where you have when you have a startup which is trying to deal with so many problems, funding, regulation, finding the right staff, all of that, and then there is a lot to say about these big corporations which are kind of taking all the technology stuff at the moment, which is sucking it out from the reach of anybody who is trying to set up a new company. What is quite interesting to see is that there are two kind of approaches. One approach is, okay, well, we know this legal system, we know this regulatory system. How can we find a way around it and actually deploy a solution quickly? Now, that's generally the approach of people who are already in the market, who are already the incumbents, who already have enough funding to deploy solutions. So what they would do is they'll find a kind of a backdoor or a easy fix solution, because they know how to lay it out and make it correct. On the other side, where I have seen this personally, is a startup who is obviously very enthusiastic about the technology and wants to actually convince the regulator that the technology is right and this is how it works and this is how it connects. The time they spend in terms of actually looking at the technology and then trying to interpret how the technology applies to the financial solution, in that time you have a parallel company which exists currently finding a rule to bend around and deploy a solution, hence disadvantaging the person who's in sandbox, because the bigger company or the incumbent doesn't need to go in the sandbox to deploy the solution. It's a very it's a fine point, but it's a big point for a startup. I've seen startups fail because they actually went into the sandbox. If they had found a way around the sandbox and actually deployed a solution and then said, okay, well, you don't like this, we can fix it, that would have been a much easier way to deal with it. So it's not a criticism, it's just an observation.
Okay, that's good to hear for us as well, because I mean, the input helps us in designing the instruments. I mean, now speaking as a lawyer, if something isn't prohibited, you should be able to put it on the market. Obviously, there is legislation on consumer protection. I mentioned investor protection in other areas, environmental protection, animal protection, etc. So, I mean, regulatory frameworks exist basically for technologies going across technologies. But where the sandbox, I think, has been seen as useful and where we've been thinking of utilizing it is exactly where people are, and this is sometimes maybe a little bit more European, that people are afraid of launching something that is not specifically allowed for in the legislation. I'll make kind of a general, perhaps, comment here. As a political scientist, which is my previous degree and academic background, that I think technology-wise, I think entrepreneurial spirit, I think a lot of the innovation frameworks we do as well in Europe as Silicon Valley, as the US. Where we have some way to go is in the venture capital is one. And then in another, there's sometimes a hesitation to move if something is not specifically allowed. I mean, I think everyone should be hesitant to move if something is prohibited. So I think that's the sandbox has tried to help with that. But I mean, I would encourage you and other startups. I mean, if you're doing something in AI, you're doing something with blockchain, I mean, go ahead and put it on the market as long as you are not impinging on some consumer interests, as long as the algorithm isn't having a discriminatory result against all ladies or all, some other group. I mean, these are the things that we just have to take into account, I mean, everywhere in our society and economy, hopefully.
Maybe coming now into the practical aspect of this whole discussion, because we were discussing like what needs to be done to go, live, but what happens if this new digital economy would be live? What would change? What are the sectors, how they would be influenced? What are the opportunities here? And talking now as a citizen, maybe you could elaborate a bit how you see the potential of those technologies emerging in specific sectors. Humayun, that would be interesting, I think.
I take a little bit more of a sci-fi visionary approach here, because we have to, because the kind of technology we're working on Fetch, it is that. So if I look at, and this, I raised this issue before, and this is again just an opinion, and this is my opinion. It's not necessarily everybody who works at Fetch's opinion, so just want to make that clear. If you look at where we're progressing, we were promised, and there was a change in the business model, and the change was that we were going more towards gig economy, where we were empowering individuals to make their own earning. And I think during this pandemic phase, we have seen that become even more prominent. That if you're moving to this new state of things, which is that the users, the consumers or the service providers, they need to have their own autonomy. So at this point in time, what is happening is that there are some big corporations which are actually, I mean, the promise was that we're going to give you power. So along comes big ride-hailing companies who were trying to empower individuals, but they actually ended up again in the same position. So we have a corporation in the middle, and although it enables you slightly in the beginning more, and as you progress even less, freedom to control your own financial destiny or your own service model, it seems that it kind of starts becoming again one of those very centralized systems. So the vision I have is that we should enable people to be their own consumers and own service providers, rather than just being controlled by central entities. Now, there is a balance here, and it can't be, you can't completely overturn the balance. But to give you an example, if you sign up for a centralized system, you're not becoming an employee, and yet you're controlling your own income, and yet when the problem hits, then the individual gets hit the most. So in those kind of approaches, I see, and it's perhaps a more idealistic view, in the future, what should happen is that the individuals will be able to, based on this blockchain and AI freedom that we should be looking for, to actually spin out their own services, would be still regulated in a way that the framework already kind of puts that regulation, but they wouldn't have to be controlled by big corporates. They could perhaps have more of an opportunity to actually individually gain some more economic value, because currently the economic value is getting collected in the centralized corporation, and sometimes too much of it is going in there. So that's my economic view of the whole system, and that would be enabled because we would have AI in a decentralized fashion. It will be because you would give every individual, technical or otherwise, the opportunity to create and engage with technology, and mostly it's the AI bit which we are quite focused on, because these days anybody can use a phone, right? And it should be no more difficult than using the phone to use the AI on the phone. But the problem is, at the moment, that AI is run and developed and deployed by central entities, and it shouldn't be, because if we want to talk about, when we talk about data belonging to the individual, we should also talk about AI belonging to the individuals. Paying an individual for their data is not the solution, because that is still that is not really giving any value. It's actually still an exploitation of the individual. So it has to be more than that. It has to be that, you don't, technology is not a hindrance, it's an enabler for individuals. And at the moment, it's a hindrance just because we can't deal with technology because some big technology company is going to come up with a solution and then they will exploit us for. And I'm not saying that will end, and I'm not saying that should end. I'm just saying individuals should have more interaction, interface, and ability to tame, to actually carve out their own AI effectively, which means what they can do is, in an easy fashion, use technology to their advantage. Sorry, I kind of get carried away there.
Thanks, Humayun. Peteris, do you want to comment on that?
Well, yes. I mean, I can say you didn't get carried away at all. I found that all interesting. And I find that, I mean, a very exciting vision. And I think it fits and probably enriches what we've been thinking as well. Because exactly enabling the individual, giving them the possibility of self-determination with their data, with their AI. I mean, we were thinking of the two AI, but I mean, I think this adds kind of an even more exciting prospect to it. But while enabling the individual and empowering the individual, which is, I mean, we are a legal system that gives rights to the individual to enforce European law. This goes back to our Western philosophy that is the basis of fundamental rights in the EU. At the same time, I mean, we're members of a society and facing societal challenges. So here, I think it's exciting, this multi-level governance aspect as well of blockchain, and possibly the distributed AI is interesting as well. I mean, we have issues that for me, I've been concerned by them for decades, the climate change, what's now called Black Lives Matter, discrimination against minorities, I mean, particularly those kinds of cases. And I mean, there's societal issues. But individuals, if mobilized, as in cases with both climates and Black Lives Matter now, can work together to get even more impact. And if this harnesses data, harnesses the technologies, coronavirus as well, donating our data to help research get to a vaccine or get to best practices more quickly. I mean, this is an exciting moment. And you have the cooperative element along with the individual element, but the individual not just being isolated, atomized, but part of a society, part of a political entity, and working together, or having dialogue and disputes on which is the way to work better, but perhaps having this reflected, and ideally having evidence as well to show when it is useful to take some kind of action. Because there's nothing worse for policy to encourage everyone to do something that has quite a bit of pain but minimal gain for what you want to solve, as opposed to things that are more shown by the evidence base, which, for instance, can be shown by AI and maybe really targeted, individualized AI, which has been raised today, to get perhaps even individualized or neighborhood by neighborhood solutions to get the best results.
Absolutely, I totally agree. I think that's quite a valid point here.
I would like to go now as a quick interlude to our Q&A session on the results of our polls. So we ask 5 questions during the session, and I would like to read them out and let you comment on them, and also give the audience an inspiration for follow-up questions. I've already seen there's some of them. So for example, the first question we ask is, how can convergence of blockchain and AI best be promoted? And we gave as options by funding, by regulatory clarity through public-private partnerships, promotion of best practices, or enhanced education. And the winner of this question was by a slight margin public-private partnerships. So that's basically supporting the case that you made, Peteris. But the second most important one is education and enhancing this education. So I think it's a very important point to outline to people the potential of it, what it can do, and also the opportunities for jobs and growth and so on. And the next one is regulatory clarity, which also makes sense, as Humayun outlined earlier. The ones on promotion of best practices and funding are slightly behind. So that's the results. The second question we ask, what are the main industries that will benefit from AI and blockchain convergence? And people had the opportunity to choose not just only one answer, but multiple ones. And we gave as options mobility, healthcare, financial services, energy, and retail. And by quite a solid margin, financial services won in front of healthcare, with mobility and energy on equal footing, and the retail as the last spot. Is this something that surprises you, or do you see in other sectors bigger opportunities, Humayun and Peteris, from your experience so far?
I think financial services is the easiest one, so I think I'm not surprised at all. I think it's the easier one to deploy, and yes, there is more regulation, but because the data is quite controlled, the results are quite controlled, and it can be done, and it's generally done by some bigger entities or people who understand the data. So the data set is quite contained. So I'm not surprised at all. I think it kind of fits in exactly. Not that I agree with it. I would like it to be different. However, it comes as no surprise.
Okay, Peteris.
I mean, similarly for me, I've worked with both, for instance, the fintech and the life sciences and health and biotechnology sectors. And I mean, in addition to what Humayun said, which I agree with entirely, I mean, you have, first of all, the financial sector often as a first mover, going back before I even joined the commission to some of the programs that were on ICT in the commission. Some of the first implementers were the banking sector in Europe. So that's on the positive side, that you have people who are ready to innovate digitally and are also able to take decisions in a fairly concentrated way. In the health sector, I think you have a spirit of innovation and a readiness to experiment, but you have the added, and it's a very serious difficulty, that you can actually harm someone's health, or I mean, even kill them with the wrong data. So there's a certain conservatism there that is very justified, that people are really asking, is this going to work better than what was there in all cases? So there you have to move forward, but really make sure you have the evidence that something is not only going to deliver a better result, but that the risk is really, really minimized, because the consequences of that risk are greater, even if, for instance, losing your money is not something that anyone's ever happy about. It's not life or death, especially if it's a small transfer, etc.
Thank you. As a third question, then we ask, what's the state of readiness for AI and blockchain convergence and deployment of enterprise use cases? And we gave us options. It's ready now, it's in the next 2 years, in the next 3 to 5 years, or it will take more than 5 years. And there's a close race between in the next 2 years and in the next 3 to 5 years. Not so many people, it's around 12% believe that it's already ready now, and even less believe that it will take more than 5 years. So we're probably talking about the next 2 to 5 years, or maybe 1 to 5 years. Is this something that you expect as well for the implementation of this convergence, Humayun, or is there a different timeline that you're seeing in the industry right now?
I think let me kind of split the question. What do you mean by enterprise ready? Because that has a little effect on the whole process. So if I say it's enterprise ready means, obviously there is no errors, there's a high probability, 99% delivery of service and all of that. If that is what is meant by enterprise ready solution, I think less and less enterprises are now enterprise ready themselves. You have seen many releases from different technology companies where it's okay to break. Things can break as long as they don't harm somebody. As long as you said in healthcare, you can't break, because if you do, and you could harm somebody. But if it's just about having an error which doesn't harm and people can move on, we have seen that in a lot of enterprises. So the two big problems is financial sector and health sector. And now, if you park that a little bit and then say, okay, there are some non-essential areas which could really benefit. I would say those areas, the actual blockchain and AI convergence is ready today. I mean, I can say that because I know that is ready today, because we are already implementing solutions in different spaces. So they're ready today. Question is being ready and getting the uptake which is required, or getting the market momentum which is required. Now, technology is ready. Technology was ready last year, and is it always going to be blockchain? I mean, I think blockchain is a red herring. Blockchain is a way of, for me, blockchain and AI convergence is connecting individual AIs together, right? Now, and the blockchain comes in because we want to connect these individual AIs in a decentralized fashion, so there's no one party which is controlling it. So if you're saying, is that track of this technology ready? I'm saying, yes, it is ready right now. We can start deploying it right now. If you're saying that it can't make any errors, or it can't have any mistakes, or is it regulatory approved, then the answer is no, because the regulator needs to kind of catch up with this. And I think, as I say, I mean, my hat's off to the whole digital initiative you are taking forward, Peteris, because you're doing way more than I think many of the other legislative bodies we've seen. So I think it's good and it's great, but it's still going to be behind it. It will always be behind. But this is the time when you start putting these frameworks in place. Even if they are not fully ready, they should be put in place now, because you're not going to see the problems. And just to hypothesize the problems is not even possible, because the solutions we are thinking of are going to evolve. And the solutions we are actually proposing today, they're not anything which is evolving from the past. They are brand new solutions. And you're not gonna just suddenly work out how to regulate them unless you see them in practice. So we are ready today. I think we should be deploying solutions within the next 1 to 5 years, and there should be non-critical solutions, but that should be happening right now.
If you want to comment, please go ahead, Peteris. Otherwise, I will move to the next question.
I could make a comment that, I mean, that sounds exciting. It's also my impression that the technology is ready. What we may be missing sometimes is the business model. the ecosystem needs to be built up. And then on the regulatory side, we do have, and unfortunately unfortunately come back to the financial sector again, we have the FinTech Lab, which brings the different supervisors together with technology providers. Us and DG FISMA organize it, and it's actually to speed up uptake of the new technologies, including AI and blockchain in a sector like finance. You have perhaps networks like the eHealth network that could be utilized in this way. For this time, I mean, they're completely preoccupied with other things as you could imagine, and perhaps not so much the forward-thinking business models. But I mean, this would be interesting to see how we can move this type of model of the regulators working together to speed up adoption, justified adoption of things that are ready for the market, the way that has been done and is being done with the FinTech Lab.
Thanks for the comment. As a first question, we then ask, in your opinion, what is the biggest challenge for implementing decentralized data ecosystems? And we gave as options education, business cases, competition with platforms, privacy and cybersecurity. And there were equal winners. So the business case on the one side and the competition with platforms. So it's very much in line with what Humayun mentioned earlier. Is there a surprise result in there for you guys that it's basically a very close call between all those four? Because the gap between the cybersecurity, which is basically the least important in this poll, to the other two is like a very narrow gap. Or is this something what you expected, basically?
Shall I go? I have a problem with the question. And I think it's a more fundamental problem because the problem is that we are fixated on data right now. And I think this is the shift in thinking which needs to come about. Yes, data is very important, but data is important when you are looking at data collection models. So you want to take all the data possible and you're going to put it in one big thing and you're going to get all the analysis out and then you're going to benefit from it. Well, again, my problem with all of that is, data economy is only benefiting bigger corporates. Yes, the financially benefiting the bigger corporations. By the time it comes down to the individuals, yes, it does create that ease of things and you could do more, but it's not empowering. So I think what I would say is, and this is how I'd like to see this evolve over the next year or 2 years, that the question becomes, how do you feel that about the AI economy or the machine learning economy? Because that's what matters. I mean, if you think about why you need data, the data is only needed in huge amounts to make the right decision. There is another way. You don't need to put all that data together to make the right decision. Humans can make decisions on very small amounts of data. Now, there is some reason to say that if you connect this decentralized economy and you instead of talking about data, you take everybody. Yes, ultimately it's data, but it's about training and empowering my AI and everybody else's AI collectively so it can deliver better results. And it can deliver better results, and it's moving towards that space where, the amount of data required is less. So I think this data economy needs to kind of become less data economy and a bit more, AI kind of economy. And AI doesn't need to always just rely on huge amounts of data. So that's my criticism of the question. Today, of course, it applies, but I'd like to see that that's changing. And it can't change unless we have this decentralized AI ability. And once we have that, then this huge data imbalance, and it is an imbalance because a lot of big corporations have the data and the smaller corporations struggle for the data. I know it's becoming more and more available, but still, anything which is uniquely beneficial for them doesn't go out. Not everybody shares everything. So, or they will take the advantage before they share it. So, that's my kind of a critique on that. Perhaps not the question you asked, but
feel free to speak out. That's why we're here. Peteris, do you want to comment on that? Otherwise, we'll move to the last question.
Well, I would. I mean, I would agree, but at the same time differ a bit that I think the scope is a little bit broader, because a part of it is as well is data as a fundamental right, is self-determination, and it's also cybersecurity. If all of people's data is in this one place and they're being, how to say, having their behavior modified, data being collected by them, and this is more susceptible to hacking, and they're not able to utilize the data, maybe sometimes it's a little bit oversold how much they could. I think this decentralized AI can complement the decentralized self-determination, the decentralization for more cybersecurity, avoiding the single point of failure. And then perhaps the last comment on that, I think, kind of agreeing and maybe going a little bit further, sometimes you get this, I think, not realistic, or how to say, not perhaps too positive possible outcome that, okay, we'll have all the data in the AI, and then the AI will be able to take all the right decisions and will take all the decisions out of the hands of decision makers. I was rereading Francis Fukuyama, who's famous for another book, but Political Order and Political Decay. And one of the things he was looking at the end was that for really badly functioning civil services, for economies that are in chaos, the idea probably is and should be to take as much discretion away from civil servants as possible, because you're coming to very bad outcomes, corruption, and so on. For a well-functioning, well-governed economy and society with stability over longer term, you actually don't want to lock people into rules or taking all decision-making discretion away from civil services, away from authorities, because then you put a straitjacket on innovation, on flexibility. So I would also be cautious about, which is not what you were being a proponent of, but sometimes this idea that we can give everything to the blockchain, to the AI, and it'll take better decisions on the behalf of all of us.
I'm only going to add to that. It's so the point I'm making is that we should have a framework which actually enables these governments to actually have the ability to put controls and feedback. So that's what I'm a proponent of. What I'm saying is that you can't do it with the pace of technology unless you invest in the framework today where the controls can be implemented. So kind of the governments, the regulators need to go one step ahead and say, okay, we have this framework, we're going to deploy it, and this is how we're going to steer it. And I think that needs to be done now rather than the framework being out there, already evolved, where they're just playing the catch-up game, and the dangers you just outlined actually become even more amplified in that case. And that's really the change and the shift on how technological development is coming.
Thank you. And as a final question, we asked the blockchain solution providers in the audience, do you plan to participate in the European blockchain services infrastructure or the pre-commercial procurement call? And maybe if you could give the elevator pitch on the pre-commercial procurement call, maybe that's an opportunity here. And the answer was 75% of the existing or the participating audience actually plans to do it. So maybe that's an opportunity, Peteris, for you to convince the other 25%.
Well, I think this is a great opportunity. It's 7 million euro. It's still a relatively small amount. We'll have more substantial investments coming, but it's an opportunity to really make improvements on blockchain models in order to have sustainability, privacy, consensus mechanism improvement, really scalability. So really take this chance. You'll get a certain amount of visibility. You'll be able to work with this project, which is 29 countries producing public service applications across borders. and hopefully it'll be a springboard for you into global possibilities. I mean, I think this is an opportunity, and I think I can say honestly, it's an exciting initiative to be a part of. The member states are all very excited about this, and we have excellent cooperation on it. We actually have a European Blockchain Partnership Policy Group meeting today. I was speaking in that and came here from there, and I think, continuing to work while I'm enjoying this dialogue.
Thanks, Peteris. I would like to open the floor to the audience now. So if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand. We're happy to put you on the panel to ask directly. Otherwise, I'm happy. I already have some questions here in the Q&A. Anybody who wants to address them personally? Otherwise, I'm happy to read them out. There's the first person. I unfortunately only see a number, but happy to let on stage. Please introduce yourself very quickly.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, a bit louder, please.
Oh, sorry. We'll tune up the audio. 1 sec, sorry.
We can hear you.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the very interesting webinar. Thanks to the panelists for the comments. Well, I'm Lucas Mill. I'm working with Sumito, and we built an open source blockchain-based invoice registration system to close the VAT gap and to fight VAT fraud. And my question for Peteris was, what's the status on the AI and blockchain investment fund? Because I only saw the announcement in November, I think. And I was wondering what the status is. Thank you.
It's functioning right now. It goes out through the European Investment Fund SME window. You can find this online, the possibility of getting these investments. If you wish, you can send me an email or write to me on Twitter or LinkedIn, and I'll give you the link. But it's implementing 100 million euro of investments starting this year and then scaling up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Please don't be shy. Otherwise, I'm happy to throw out some questions. So we received a question from Ray Walsh. He asked the International Standardization ICO TC307 working group projects are evolving standards for smart contract security, while EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum publish reports on blockchain governance cybersecurity. How best can the Commission drive the co-evolution of international standards and blockchain technology, as standards are the bedrock on which future certification regulation and legislation in blockchain will be built? Maybe you could answer that.
Well, I'm glad to answer with a little bit of an advertisement. Thank you, Ray, for the question. On the 17th of June, and it's open, you can register. We're having a blockchain standardization meeting, a webinar that the Commission is organizing. It has our Commission representative, who's in my unit, who goes to ISO Technical Committee 307. We're going to have some of the member states participants in ISO Technical Committee 307, as well as people from ETSI, Sensenelec, the other standardization organizations, and some of the initiatives like INATBA, the International Association of Trusted Blockchain Applications, that also coordinates in the standards area. So please come to that, raise your questions, and the same, you can also contact me directly if you have input or a punctual suggestion of something that you think that we should be raising in that committee or in some other fora.
Thank you. The next question I want to ask Petko Karamochev to ask personally, please. Floor is yours.
Thank you. As a matter of fact, I wrote my question in the Q&A, but I haven't heard it. Anyway, my question is to Peteris and a little bit to Fetch.AI as well. First of all, Peteris, who will own the data on the European blockchain service infrastructure? Have you thought about it? And how it can be used for public good in a similar way that, for example, Outlier Ventures talking about a real open data economy? Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent question. And we're working on that right now. And why I can say we're working on it is that the first use cases that will go live in the case of the regulatory reporting, there is no personal data, and it's data that is member states value added tax and customs excise data, so statistics. And there's a process, they basically own it. With the use cases that are coming with the diploma and the self-sovereign identity, we have to solve, first of all, how it works in the context of the General Data Protection Regulation. This is also part of the pre-commercial procurement, and exactly how we, with the data protection supervisor, when these use cases come online, will implement that regulation in our mirror regulation on data protection on the in the European institutions. And the data, for instance, on the diploma, on each person's identity will, and this is, I hesitate a little bit because for a lot of people in data protection, the question of ownership as opposed to control and data subject is a little bit controversial. So I'll say own in quotation marks without saying that I'm setting out here a ownership right in data. But the data stays with those people. I mean, we are not going to be disseminating it. The data will be held by the data subject. I mean, that's the idea in the implementation. And now in actually designing the application, and as we onboard the first real users in the regulatory reporting or the audit documents, these already have their frameworks. We will have to tackle this, but the idea would definitely not be like a super platform, like a mega platform that the data would be with the European Commission, which we would be then selling to advertisers or something of that sort. So, I mean, the data, it really is to empower the individual to control their own identity, obviously to control their own diploma. Probably the diplomas are also in some way, to say the least, in the sense of verifying that they're real in the hands of the institutions that issue them.
Do you want to also?
So there is this identity data, which I think is more regulatory kind of specific as well. But then you have these action data sets. Now, we are focused on, Fetch is focused more on the action data sets. So, for example, if you go to a certain place, if you eat certain kind of food, if you buy certain kind of products, that data, just by the sheer fact that you've actually carried out the action, is going to a particular central entity, commercial or non-commercial. It could be either. But what we are saying, and I think we're going one step forward from the identity data, is that your actions are your actions, and they should actually benefit you in terms of what kind of service you get, what kind of discounts you get, what kind of economic value you get. So what we're building is you know, it's a lot more, not just the ownership of this data you can actually as such record, but all the data that you know, what time you wake up, you know, all that kind of things, which are going to these entities to make a decision on your behalf and to sell you things. What we are saying is that data, we have to have a model to capture that data for your benefit where it sits with you. You do not give it to a central entity. You do not put it to a central entity. You control your actions. You control the data which is generated from the actions, and you actually enable your own AI. You actually spin out your own preference engines or AI to actually enable you to do things more efficiently and benefit you. So we're just taking that one step further. But to answer your question, we have no doubt the ownership of the data should be, or the use of the data should be to the user itself, to the generator of the data.
And just agreeing that, I mean, in our philosophy, and we have to see how we technically implement it. We don't want, as the European Commission, to know who you're showing your diploma to or where you're logging into Wi-Fi with your identity. I mean, to the extent that this is technically possible, we never want to have this data.
I hope that
good to know. Thank you.
Petko.
Thank you. Good to know. Thank you both for answering.
Great question.
Anybody else with questions? Otherwise, I would like to raise a question, or rather read a question that one of our members asked, and unfortunately, with the time difference, couldn't be present here. So the upcoming PCP call and the EPSI address a very narrow scope of use cases. So currently it's 5 only. So what about the support for industrial use cases, for example, mobility or supply chain and other machine-to-machine economy would very much benefit from the support as well. What are your thoughts on that? Why is it only those 5 narrow use case approaches, let's call it?
As is often the case, resources. We have 7 actually now, but the first year we had 4 million euro. The next year we had 7 million euro. Now we have the 7 million euro for the PCP. We look to ramp up substantially in the Digital Europe program in the next budget as part of technological sovereignty, as long as, of course, this is approved by the heads of state. This is above my level, the final budget. And then we would move into substantial collaboration with the private sector. But at the same time, I signal there's the AI blockchain investment fund that can invest in all these areas. It will be going up to as much as 400 million. Then you have the whole research budget, which has spent, I think it was 286 million at some point. It's probably over 300 million. And you'll have similar sums coming in the next horizon. So on the research side, and then in the recovery package, you have this whole envelope for investment, which can go to other things, but it can also go to AI and blockchain together, or AI or blockchain. So, I mean, we very much want to encourage this. I say we very much have an ecosystem philosophy, but we also have to be humble. Who are we? We're providing some public services with the member states for the citizens. So you also don't want us civil servants to be both thinking up and managing the private sector mobility solutions. The legal frameworks help with that. The investment helps with that. Ideally, the public sector side that can collaborate with you. And hopefully this will build a vital and dynamic ecosystem in Europe that will enable the private sector counterparts to really take off and be globally competitive.
And this is open also for non-EU startups or companies, right? The EPSI.
The pre-commercial procurement, I would have to look in the rules. I mean, there's a set of rules that will be published in the procurement. Off the top of my head, I'd prefer not to comment on that because the procurement also, the final procurement isn't published yet.
Okay, thank you. Just as a last point, because we overdraw already a bit, if both of you could maybe address one wish to the other one, and what would that be? So what would the industry would want as the most immediate and most impactful measure to be taken by the European Commission, or even more specifically, maybe by DG Connect or even Peteris unit? And on the other side, Peteris, if you could give a wish to the industry, and in this case to Humayun on their behalf, what should they do? What would you like to see more? Or where would some support that you don't receive yet, or some help that hasn't been granted yet, please?
So I think my wish would be that we can have a more generalized framework rather than specific. I think you pointed that a little bit, Robert, in the sense that why only 7 sectors, and I think it's a very it's a difficult thing to do, choose which one. But I think there is a way to say, okay, here's the framework. We should not start distinguishing these vertical silos, because don't forget they're all interlinked, and they you know, if you're looking at individuals and their lives and what technology is coming and doing, they're all very intermingled. I mean, our social media is now our professional media now. We're having interviews at home. We are all used to all this stuff. So they're all very intermingled. So my wish would be that if we can have a generalized framework which enables businesses to understand and deploy their solutions, and not necessarily just the financial solutions, that that would be a great help. And I think you guys are already taking a great step towards it. So it's, again, it's more a encouraging thing than anything else, but I think it still could do with a bit more generalized framework.
Peteris?
I mean, I would say to the private sector, as always, create, innovate, try things, implement things, maybe really address some of these grand societal challenges we have, like climate change and sustainability, and keep telling us if you need something from us. You can't perhaps always come to your assistance, but if you see barriers, if you see things that you think need to be acted upon in Europe, I mean, we are more than happy to hear from your inputs. Tell us what's working. Tell us where you think some technology is very mature, or where an ecosystem needs perhaps a little bit of a push that the public sector could give in one or another context. I mean, we're here to be your partners and to help this whole initiative and this whole adventure go forward.
And we will. Rest assured.
Very good. On this note, I thank you both very much for your time, for this very interesting discussion. I hope the audience also enjoyed it. We had a lot of points that have been covered. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a part of a webinar series. So in 2 weeks, we have the next one with a slightly different topic. So we will cover tracing of COVID via blockchain and how this could be working. We will discuss this also with a colleague of yours from DG Connect, Jakub Boratinsky, and a member of the European Parliament, Sirpa Pietikainen, and some industry representatives. And I hope this will be an equally interesting discussion. If you have any questions about the outline of our webinars, then I'm happy to give you that. So please send us a mail, follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn. And if you have in general questions about blockchain or specifically on some of the issues, then please send them as well. We're happy to share them with our members to get back to you. And once again, thank you both. We really appreciated your time, and thanks for the audience for coming and joining. Have a good day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you very
everybody.
much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.